If I told you I'd improved my productivity by 50% in the last quarter, you'd probably be impressed. You might think I was a machine, and you'd probably be asking me for tips on what I'm doing and how you can get the same results in your own life. But if in the course of asking me those questions, I told you that 6 months ago, I had only successfully completed 2 tasks, and this past quarter, I'd successfully completed 3, you would probably feel very differently about my progress. And if you were my boss, there's a chance you might fire me. But that's exactly what is happening in the AI world right now. Everywhere you look, you're seeing this massive hype, this hysteria over the exponential growth and improvement that we're seeing in AI development and AI capability. But when you peel that back and start to look at the real numbers in terms of practical terms, what is AI actually capable of doing? The numbers are still shockingly low. I'm Christopher Lind, and this is Future Focused. And this week, I'm going to be revisiting some research out of remotelabor.ai that I talked about last November, but they've had some updates related to what they're calling the Remote Labor Index, which is essentially, how it performs in real world tasks. But before we do, if you enjoy this episode, or if you've enjoyed my content in the past and you benefit from it, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed and shared this with somebody else who'd benefit from it. If you so feel inclined, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind and support the show financially. And if you need help with this kind of work and understanding what to do with technology and business transformation, reach out. This is what I spend my time doing. I consult in this and help people achieve performance results while keeping people at the center of it. Okay, before we get into it, I do want to I'm not going to revisit the whole research paper that we did, but I do want a context set for those of you who may not have heard it, or maybe, it's been a while since you've heard it. So remote labor, what they did was they said, listen, all these AI companies are using what is called the MMLU. There's a bunch of benchmarks, but the MMLU is a big one, which stands for Massive Multitask Language Understanding. And essentially, it's like the IQ test for AI models. And the AI vendors, they love this thing because they can come out with their new model and they give it the test and it blows, its previous score out of the water. And they go, wow, look how much better our AI models are, how much more capable they are, all this great stuff. And it looks great. And it's great for headlines. It'll trend on Futurism and, Business Insider and all this stuff. But it's actually, for the most part, completely useless for business. And I can say that with the consulting work I do. I normally don't get called in to say, hey, we're really trying to pass this test. Do you think you can help us get an AI model to help us do it? That's not what they're looking to do. They're looking to get AI to integrate in and help support their employees, or in some cases, fully automate things. And they need it to perform as well or better than their human counterparts. And the reality is, it doesn't work that well. And that's what remote labor wanted to do, is they said, well, how do we actually benchmark that? How do we compare that? And so what they did is they actually take freelancers, they take tasks, jobs, things that you would actually go pay money to have done. And then they have a freelancer do it. And then they have an AI model do it, and they compare the results. And let's just say when you actually do that, you quickly see how bad it is. And back in November, when I did this, the highest score was by Manus, and it was 2.5%. And when I say 2.5%, what I mean by that is, if I were to say, I need this task done, I need some marketing collateral drawn up for this new initiative. And you asked a remote freelance person that does marketing work to put together a strategy and maybe some media for that. And then you went to an AI agent and you said, you do the same thing. 2.5% of the time, at best, AI came back with something that was even acceptable. This isn't like, you would choose it over the human. It's just like, did it even come back like you could even accept it? And so I want to ground where we are today, because there have been some new models that have come out and things like that. But I think it's also important to remember that as you look at these numbers, in my opinion, according to Christopher here, I would say these numbers are still hyperinflated. So even when you look at this, it's important to keep in mind these are going to be inflated, because if you look at the prompts that they give to the AI model to do it, they're very detailed still. And even what you get back, you'd have to have some level of expertise to even know, is this good or not? Now, there's clear examples in the research where you go, I mean, my children could look at that and go, well, that's a flop. But then there's some other ones where on the surface, if you didn't know what you were looking at, you might be like, wow, yeah, that's pretty good. But somebody who's an expert in their field would go, that's terrible. Like, that's something a junior intern out of college might come up with, but it won't hold water. And also then there's the whole prompting, like even writing the prompt to ask AI to do the thing that you wanted. So keep that in mind when you see this as well. But let's pull up where we are now. Okay, so I'm gonna make this big so you can see. Now, this is the latest chart that includes the numbers from the research in November, and then they've added the new numbers in there. Now, the new ones are Opus 4.5, GPT 5.2, and then Gemini 3 Pro. The other ones were in the November research, and then they've updated with this. And the headline here is Opus 4.5 took the lead, because before Manus 1.5 was leading with 2.5%, which, keep that in mind, 2.5% of the time in November, AI came back with something even acceptable as compared to its human counterpart. Now we're shouting from the rooftops that it's jumped to 3.75. That's where our massive 50% growth is coming from. We're saying we are now up to 3.75% of the time. If you were to ask AI to do something you would ask a human to do, it would come back with something that you would consider acceptable, that would still need to be vetted by an expert to see whether it even was worth it. Now, what's missing from this report is the 96.25%. This chart looks big and fancy and the bars look really high till you remember the fact there's 96.25% of blank space above this, of work that AI cannot do. It cannot do it in any way, shape, or form at a level that would be acceptable to, what you would need in your business. Now, you may look at that and go, well, wow, okay, maybe you didn't hear my episode in November and you're like, that's pretty shocking compared to what we keep hearing when we keep hearing that AI is about to replace humans. We can, you can lay off all your staff. And yeah, it is. If you're not familiar with the RLI, it should shock you a little bit. Now, to be fair, I think it's important to understand, well, why is getting work done so hard? And it's because it's not the code. And that's why it can pass these tests pretty flawlessly. But then when you ask it to go do something, it doesn't do it very well. And it's not because it's not coded to do certain tasks well. It's not if you specifically asked it to do one specific activity, it couldn't maybe execute that one activity really well. It's the context and general intelligence that people have, the adaptability, their ability to put all these different pieces together seamlessly into something of meaning, and the lived experience that we have that allows us to do that AI just doesn't. AI can write the function. It can execute the very specific thing you asked it to do, but it can't figure out that John from accounting actually meant update the database, not delete the table. And so when it has those things, or when it hears it, or it misinterprets even the details of a specific activity, it just does what it was asked to do, because it's a pattern recognition tool designed to execute the instructions given to it by the person giving the instructions. And so when you just tell it, it can't process that. And so I don't want to knock on the AI models, and I don't want people to hear me say 3.75% is the top of the pile. Ha ha ha, AI is incapable. No, it's extremely capable. But when you think about the complexity and the nuance that goes into actually executing real work, there's a lot more to it that is not so easily handed off to an AI agent that can then just go grab all these different functioning pieces. And I think this is revealing, and what many companies I encounter are finding is we grossly underestimate the complexity that goes into work. And so we assume, well, isn't work just a series of these tasks? So if we tell it to just do these tasks, which AI can do, if we were to give it a test on those tasks and pass the test, why can't it do it? Well, because first of all, one, we're skipping a lot of steps. We miss a lot of things. We don't know a lot of things. But then when you actually start to put them together, the patterns are inconsistent. They don't always work the same way. And that's why you may ask AI to help you with something, and one time you go, it did a really great job. And then you literally input the exact same prompt, give it the exact same set of instructions, and it comes back and you go, what the heck is this? Like, this isn't even remotely what you did last time. And so I think it's important to recognize that. So when you hear these headlines and you're tempted to make decisions, you're thinking about these numbers here. You're at least filtering it through these numbers as you even start to ask yourself, all right, are we just asking it to do a consistent, repeatable activity that is always the same, or are we asking it to do real work? And this is why I get very concerned when I hear companies continuing to focus their effort on layoffs as they lay off massive swaths of their teams based on the idea that AI can do work. Well, data's in and it continues to be in, and it cannot automate your workforce, not even any remotely reasonable percentage of it at this time. Now, I will get into more detail on that because, again, there's some context. So let's break down 3 things that I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into as you consider these numbers, because maybe you're reeling right now if this is the first you've actually seen the actual, like, all right, here's what it actually is capable of doing. So hang with me because there's context and there's some additional things to understand. So the first one is, okay, if this is the truth, if this is the reality behind it, if at best we're at 3.75%, what on earth, why are so many companies continuing to lay off employees? Why are the AI vendors doing all these? Why is the hype so high right now? And I want to acknowledge and empathize with the fact, because I see this every day in the work I do when I talk to leaders, when I advise the AI companies as well. The pressure is higher than I think it's ever been in my career. I don't think I've ever seen people feeling the weight and the crushing pressure that they are right now. I talk to CLOs and CTOs every single week who feel like they're stupid or they're behind if they aren't buying and implementing something new. And I see the AI vendors who are struggling as some of the reality of this is starting to hit, and some of these huge promises that have been made over the past few years, the promises that, hey, just give us another quarter and it'll be there. Like, look at these benchmarks. We are on the verge of AGI. We're on the verge of ASI. We are about to crack the code. And they've been making some big promises that aren't necessarily turning up. And so you see this enormous pressure right now. And so you might ask yourself, like, why are the AI vendors selling you agents that fail 96.25% of the time? And the reason for it is it's very expensive to create these AI models. They are already billions of dollars in the hole on this. And so they can't really afford to wait for the tech to be perfect. And so I empathize with that. They need your enterprise budgets right now. They need your continued investments to keep moving things forward, to move it from 3.75% to 5, or whatever. They need that continued financial investment. And so as a result, a lot of times the pressure's there. Now, I'm not saying that makes it okay. And if you're a tech vendor listening to this, you are setting yourself up for failure if you are making these promises that you can't deliver. And if data like what I just showed freaks you out because it blows up your whole sales model, I'm sorry, but you can't be doing that. At the same time, to the C-suite leaders and the decision makers in organizations, it is important that you recognize this is where we are with this technology right now. I know you're under tremendous pressure, but this is why I create these resources that I do, that I try and point them to people, why I do the consulting work that I do, to try and help push back against some of this pressure of, because your bosses are hearing it. They're hearing AI should be able to automate, Anthropic Sonnet just dropped or Opus, whatever one it was. And it's like, oh, we don't need lawyers anymore because it can do that. That's what they're hearing. And so then they're looking to you going, why do you still have a team? Why do you not just have a team of agents doing things? And so it's your responsibility not to know all the ins and outs of it, but to be able to know, hey, here's the reality of this, so that you can push back on some of these things and say, well, we actually can't make that move right now because I know we just saw a fully autonomous pitch from this organization, but we need to recognize that in real world data, it doesn't work that way. And it is not your job to fund the AI company's R&D. It's your job to protect your P&L. And so it's important to just understand those dynamics are happening right now, which creates enormous pressure on everybody. But I think it's important that we all figure out, like, how do we let some of the pressure off? Because we're making right now, what I can tell you, we are making some really, really dumb decisions, really, really foolish decisions that are going to cost all of us big time in the long run if we don't start operating off the real world data and figuring out the different channels for funding the work that is important, that needs to get done. But we can't do that by bamboozling and, grifting enterprises into buying things that won't actually deliver and actually put them in greater risk. Because in the end, it ends up costing everybody. When the company gets a lawsuit because something blows up, well, then they're coming after the AI companies, and then they've lost. Everybody gets hurt in the process. So there's that piece. At the same time, I think it is important because it's easy to look at this chart and just go 3.75. Like, that's a joke. That's a joke. It sucks. Like, okay, well, it doesn't suck. That is impressive. And I think the other big piece that we need to focus on here is how fast it's still moving. And a good analogy with this would be, if you think about this, and I've hired a number of early career people over the years, and you get somebody who's maybe fresh out of college, or maybe somebody who's new to the industry or new to the field, and they really are performing well. Maybe in the first 3 months, you were expecting them to be here and they're 50% ahead of where you were. You don't automatically promote them to, head of the function. That would be foolish. You wouldn't do that. But you are certainly going to watch them. You're not just going to overlook the fact that, hey, this person's showing some real promise. They're moving in a really positive direction. You're watching that velocity. You're not freaking out about the fact that, oh my word, they aren't, this new intern is not performing at the level of this 20-year career veteran over here. Well, of course not. Those are silly expectations to have. And in many cases, those are the expectations we're having of AI. We've got junior deputy intern over here, and we're like, just because somebody told us, oh, they can be CEO, we're like, wow, okay, well, let's put him in the CEO. Like, what are you doing? It doesn't matter if junior deputy intern is proving and maybe at some point could be a CEO. I don't think that's where AI is going. But even in theory, if it could, you don't move them in there. But you also don't worry about the fact they're not performing at that level now. And so we shouldn't be freaking out about the fact that AI is at 3.75% right now. We should be going, okay, like, that is notable. The fact that we've gone from 2.5% to 3.75% in 3 months, that is a notable increase. That is a significant jump in scores that we're talking about here. And that's something that we should be paying attention. And I think something that else that can be missed in this is that it's easy to miss one of the sleeper insights, which is if you look at Gemini, okay, it's easy to knock on Gemini. And according to this chart, they should be the last company we should be paying attention to, because we go, Google, they're way at the bottom. Look at Anthropic. Look at OpenAI. Look what they're doing. Look at Manus. They're still sitting at 2.5, and they haven't had an update since this research was done. Imagine where they might be after the next release. Maybe they'll be at 4.25. Who knows? But then you look at Gemini and you go, yeah, but Gemini went from 2.5 to 3, and they jumped from 0.83% to 1.25. That's actually the biggest jump on the entire chart. If you compare the 2.5 to 3.75, you're talking about little under 50% increase. 0.83 to 1.25 is just a little over 50%. So if you think about that in terms of trajectory, things are actually moving in a really positive direction at a really impressive pace. Now, does that mean you should run out and replace your employees? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And let me be crystal clear that even if, because that's the other thing, you'll continue hearing these hype headlines that say, well, we're at 3.75. Imagine where we'll be 2 years from now. We'll probably be at 50%. And you're like, well, that's a pretty generous assumption. But even if hypothetically we say in another year or 2 years, we're at 10%. Okay. So 10% of the time you can count on it. Well, that is miles away from replacement. Okay. If you had an employee that 10% of the time accurately did what you asked it to do, came back to you 10% of the time with even remotely something that was acceptable, not like grade A, but even just acceptable, you wouldn't keep them around. Now, that's why I say we are miles from replacement. But if, let's say, you had a digital tool that could give 7.5 or 5%, 3.6, if it could give that kind of lift to the grunt work, if it could execute specific tasks, repeatable tasks that are eating up large percentages of your workforce's time, well, now that's extremely valuable. And that's why I don't ever want anybody to walk away from this and think, oh, well, if we're at, I'm not going to pay attention to what's going on with AI till the RLI hits more than 50%. Well, we probably aren't going to hit more than 50%. I don't like making predictions, but I'd be hard pressed if in my career we even get close to that. Maybe I'll be wrong, but based on the trajectory of things, I don't think so. And so when we think about that, it's like, okay, yeah, we need to put to bed this idea that AI is going to be our replacement anytime soon, because the real danger isn't that AI is going to take jobs. In fact, I think assigning and giving away jobs to AI is extremely risky. And I am seeing the costs to organizations that are making this mistake be far beyond whatever they think they're saving. So if you're still thinking, or even as part of your strategy, have replacement theory in place, I would strongly advise you to strip that straight out and start thinking about augmentation. But I think the other real lesson from this, when we think about trajectory, okay, when we think about the fact we've gone from 2.5% to 3.75 in a quarter, we've gone from 0.83 to 1.25 in a quarter. That is notable. And one of the biggest dangers that I think organizations can have right now is building really rigid systems that are not designed to quickly adapt to the tools and the ways that they're developing and where they're growing, and even just which tools are showing up on the stage. I mean, think about the fact that if you were to compare the numbers 3 months ago to where they are today, you may make a different decision on which vendor you would even consider. You might make a vastly different decision based on that. If you were at the end of your RFP in November, you might have chosen very differently than if you were at the end of your RFP right now. And so if you have hyper rigid systems that don't allow for flexibility, or if you're signing super long-term contracts, which again, all these companies are going to want you to sign a 3, 5, 10-year deal. Well, that may not be the wisest move, or you need to build conditions in place that allow you to be able to adapt quickly, or maybe not get too embedded with any particular tool because of how quickly it's moving. And so I think that's a really important factor right now, is recognizing where do we have dangerous levels of rigidity in our systems right now that may not be able to adapt or flex to the way these systems are moving and adapting, and how we may need to be flexible in the decisions we are making moving forward. And I think that's a far more important thing to be thinking about right now than, how can we start replacing some of our people? I think that's a very, very different question that we need to be focusing on as we start thinking about this. Now, the third and final point that I want to talk about is we've got to redefine good. And the way I would frame this up is to say, we need to move away from this idea of like capability. And when I say capability, I would say, it passes the IQ test. Is it capable of doing some of this stuff? Well, maybe. And maybe those numbers are going to continue to increase at, orders of magnitude beyond what we can comprehend. That's fine if it's capable of that. But reliability, when we think about business execution and actually implementing and integrating this into our workflows and our systems, that is far, far, far more important. And let me give you an example from a recent project that I was working on. I was working with an organization, and we had developed a pilot where we were looking at a very specific, we weren't talking about automating roles. We were looking at a very specific set of tasks that, based on benchmarks and based on all the data, this AI was more than capable of doing. Okay. It exceeded our requirements in terms of capability, passing the test beyond what we needed, hands down. However, my advisement as we went into it was like, let's actually put this into the field. Like, let's actually put this into practice, into a small setting, and let's see how it performs. And let's see how this agent performs in real world scenarios, because we all know that real world scenarios never go quite like the test. And when we did, we tried to use the agent, and what we found was, I can't remember if it was 6 or 7 times out of 10, it did what we asked. But the 2 to 3 times that it failed in ways that required us to kill the whole pilot. And the reason for that was its failures were so catastrophic that the consequences of those failures at scale would have grossly outweighed the 60 to 70% of the time it would have been successful. And so that was just a real world example where we went, on paper, this AI model should be able to do all of these tasks. And in isolation, it crushed it every single time. We're like, well, there you go. We ask it this question, it gets it right. We ask it this question, we get it right. We ask it to do this very specific thing, it does it right. Then we move it into the real world practice where it has to start answering different variations of the questions and applying it in a slightly different way each time, and having to flex and bend around certain circumstances. Suddenly it's not performing at those same levels we thought it needed to. And then when we actually saw how it failed and realized the implications of what happens if we get that kind of scale of failure across the entire organization, you start to do the math on that and you realize we can't do this. Now, we ended up moving forward with AI in that, but we had to drastically scale back how we were doing it, and we dramatically changed the human involvement in the process to make sure we caught those 2 to 3 times out of 10 where it was breaking, and we knew what to look for. And so again, we re-engineered how we did it. We didn't throw AI out. we didn't just stay with the old. We still transformed what we were working on. We just did it very differently than we thought we would. But that required us to actually redefine our good. What is the standard of good? Is it the potential of what it could do? Or is it in execution, it reliably performs the way we need it to perform? And we just need to stop asking, can AI do it? Because the reality is there's very few things right now that AI can't do in the right circumstances. It's just a matter of how consistently does it do it, and when it fails, how does it fail, and what are the impacts of that failure? And so as you're thinking about, pilots or areas of opportunity for doing that, because what we saw in that example I just gave was by fine-tuning AI and changing the way we re-engineered it, it actually did free up the other people to have more capability to, one, catch the error rate. They actually reduced overall error rates because humans make errors too. It's not like humans are perfect, but because they had the added capability to pay closer attention, they were actually able to catch the error rate. They reduced their overall error rate and increase productivity, because this task we ended up automating was a very high time. It ate a lot of people's time. And so we were able to engineer this in a way that still overall, when we looked at reliability, improved the overall speed, overall performance, and overall reliability of it. But we had to define those metrics. And that's something that everybody's going to have to do. Well, RLI as a standard is great. I think that's something we should be paying much closer attention to versus some of these industry benchmarks. The industry benchmarks are great for the AI models to compare each other, and that's great. They can go flex, on each other all they want. But we've got to be looking at other standards, and I think RLI is a good one. But even in those circumstances, I would say you still are going to have to define and lay out what are your reliability standards for each situation where you're leaning in, because absent that, AI is going to leave you with a mess that is far more costly, far more time consuming to clean up than if you just, honestly, in some cases, I'm careful. I want to be careful saying this, but in some cases, you are better off staying where you are than recklessly using AI. But that I frame that in the sense that doesn't mean you don't want to use AI, because the people who do it surgically and intentionally are going to beat out those that ignore AI, if that makes sense. So as we kind of wrap this up, I think the three practical takeaways from those points that I brought was, first of all, one, if a vendor's telling you agent, if you hear the word agent, ask it for, what's its RLI score? And if they don't know, then maybe do a little bit of digging and really find out, how does it actually perform in practice? Talk to other people who are using it, find out how they're using it and how well it's actually performing. The other one is, you have to build systems that are adaptable and can rapidly adjust, because you cannot be building for the AI of today. Because even today, the research shows 3.75% on your top model. Okay, well, but if you build for that process today and it takes you a year to get there, we might be at 10 or 15% by there. And whatever you were building for will already be outdated. And so you just need to be building systems and infrastructure that is adaptable to that. And then the third is, make sure you're establishing reliability standards with whatever it is you're doing, so that you're not just looking at the potential of, could AI do something, but how well is it doing it? And you're measuring consistency, not AI's creativity, because AI getting creative with your business is not something that will end well. And so remember, I know things are moving fast. I know things are changing all the time. I will continue to do my best to help break this down and make it digestible and understandable and actionable for you. But we're in this for the long haul. We're playing the long game. Don't take quarter to quarter, jumps, because again, you might have made a huge decision in November only to realize you'd made the wrong one in February, a few months later. So I'm Christopher Lind, and this has been Future Focused. And with that, I'll see you on the other side.